it's Kyle, and I'm back again with another agronomy update. Joining you here from the shed again, as we've been pretty wet in the fields, and it's really windy today, so I'm trying to find a nice place to kind of do this where I'm kind of inside and kind of out of the elements a little bit. But just want to talk a little bit about what's been going on in the fields, which is not much in the last week or so. So anywhere from 2 to 3 inches of rain probably since the start of the month here, and it's pretty much kept us out of the field. So it's been wet. It's been cold for the most part, except for the last couple of days here. We are seeing a little bit of drying in corn. I checked a field where we checked it at about 23 to 24% about a week or so ago. Checked it again today, and we're running around 20% hand check. So stuff is drying down, but I mean it's kind of somewhat delayed. I imagine after this weather comes through, we're talking lows in the highs in the 40s. So we're going to start seeing some of that dry down slow down again. But at this point, for the most part, corn is holding up okay. There are some few hybrids that are handling the stress of the tar spot and everything else we've got going on, especially with stalk diseases, some crown rots. You start looking at some ear molds. Some hybrids are handling that totally different, and you can tell which hybrids kind of are now, and we have a really good idea of what's actually handling it really well. So one thing I'm working on a little bit is, for our guys that we're working with, is trying to come up with a list of what hybrids are handling different diseases right now, what hybrids aren't handling it as well. And so when we kind of go on the seed sales season, which has been going on for probably about a month now, we have an idea of what hybrids we want to look at and what hybrids we might want to avoid. There's been a lot of tar spot stuff coming out in the last couple of weeks. The biggest thing is more of what we don't know rather than what we do know. I did get an email about a week ago about some other fungicides getting labeled for tar spot. The email is aptly worded. The rep who sent it to me, I know him pretty well. His email basically said, we have a label for tar spot, and it's labeled as control, but take that with a grain of salt. And that it means they basically have no studies, no research being done really at this point on how well that stuff will control tar spot. The caution is, and I posted this on Twitter the other day, we don't know, for one, how well what each fungicide is going to do, and how well it's going to control it. And the other part of it is, we really don't know anything about timing. We could be spraying at V5 and BT and not do anything. There's a possibility we could be spraying at R1 to R2 and doing a better job when we get some of that residual out of it. So we really don't know yet. There's going to probably be plenty of companies that will follow suit on that. So there'll be a lot of companies that will add tar spot to their label. Theoretically, it's a fungus or fungicide should control it. That's going to be the main key here. They really don't have a lot of research behind it. So take those with a grain of salt. Dave, that's what his email said, and I really respect him for saying that. So basically, he understands that we don't have the research there for that yet. So the other thing is, we've been seeing a lot of ear molds. You get further north of here, I'm hearing more and more. So once we kind of get into our Dodge County and northern areas here, a lot of guys talking about ear molds. The two things you want to watch out for is Diplodia and Gibberella. Those are the two with mycotoxins. Gibberella is the pink one. Diplodia is the white one. Some of you guys will see some Fusarium, some of the other stuff kind of come in. That stuff is a little bit different. Those I'm not as worried about as I am about Diplodia and Gibberella. So when you're looking at fields, make sure you walk out past the headlands. When we start looking at fields, you'll notice some of the blackbird damage, a lot of the other stuff will be on the edges. Once you walk out, we're not finding quite as much. The other thing is, I had a guy ask me a question, what do we do besides, planting dates as far as controlling ear molds? There's no fungicides labeled for it. The biggest thing I can tell you, in my experience, is we want to make sure we don't have any insects in it if we can. So trying to get somewhat of a higher stack as far as corn goes above ground. So right now, western bean cutworms are a big one. There's only one trait that really does a great job on it. I wouldn't even say a great job, we'll just say an average job on it. Every other trait, even though it was labeled previously, has been pulling their labels on it. So we don't have heavy western bean cutworm pressure in this area though. So traits are one thing. The biggest thing is trying to make sure when you plant, if you do a side-by-side or you split hybrids or anything like that, try to get those maturities as close as you can. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean a 101 and a 101. I want to look at silking dates as well. So when we have 101-day corn, sometimes we'll have stuff that is 101 day, but it silks like a 99-day or a 98-day corn, sometimes even lower than that. So we'll get an early silk on it. It'll be ahead of the field. And when you have part of a field with just one hybrid at a maturity that blackbirds really like to go after, it's the same thing when we look at raccoons. Raccoons typically prefer one over the other if you have a split hybrid. So what we'll see is that blackbirds will go after that. When we start seeing them tip feeding on that, that's when we start getting ear mold. So the biggest thing I can say is try to match your silking dates up as much as you can. You know, hybrid maturity is one thing, but we need to look at that silking GDU to try to understand where we can get those hybrids in a field. So it doesn't necessarily mean that for everybody. A lot of people do plant one hybrid in the entire field. So, you know, it's kind of a crapshoot as far as if we're going to get ear molds or not. This year's just been spectacularly different in that we're so far ahead, and then you throw tar spot in and throw another week or so on top of that maturity. You know, we're still getting a lot of ears that are standing as well. So we're getting a lot of water in ears with open husks, and that really opens up for ear molds, especially when we start getting warmer temperatures. So there's some different ear molds that will affect hybrids when we start seeing cooler temperatures. We haven't seen those yet. The one we always talk about is cladosporium. Cladosporium was a big one for us in 2009. A lot of you do remember 2009 because that was the year we were doing 28, 30+% moisture corn, and they'd never dried down. We don't have high moisture corn as much this year, so we're dealing with low moisture corn, so we're going to see a lot of those other ear molds. So other than what I've given you advice wise, there's not much else you can do. You know, you really don't want to spray insecticides. There is a window where we can control western bean cutworm. That's kind of a conversation we need to have next July or August. You know, if we see flights and we start finding egg masses, that's something that we might want to consider. But for the most part, western bean cutworm in Wisconsin's been fairly isolated to areas around like Baraboo and some of these central sands regions. So we haven't seen that pressure as much in this area. So that's one thing. Now we're kind of starting to hear guys talking about using fertilizer or making fertilizer plans and some plans for next year. So we always talk about budgets and creating budgets and trying to work within budgets. And, you know, right now, it's kind of hard to predict what next year's going to bring. You know, we're looking at different corn prices and bean prices. Some people do have some stuff contracted. A lot of others don't. The one thing to understand is trying to figure out what your costs are going to be, what your break-evens are, and trying to even do it by farm. The thing I always talk about is trying to do that on a bi-weekly or a monthly basis so you understand how things affect what's going on, especially market conditions. You know, fertilizer prices are always threatening that they're going to change. So try to work with somebody that's gonna be able to do that for you. I've been doing that for probably 8 or 9 years now, where we sat down and tried to figure out break-evens. We're working on ours here at the farm. You know, we created one for this spring. And when I looked at the pricing on it, I think I had $3.50 to $3.75 corn and $9 plus beans. So obviously we need to update ours. We haven't done it in a few months. So that's something you should be doing. You know, we do a really good job of making sure the crop does well. But when we think about financial stuff like that, we need to actually pay a little bit more attention. You know, we're more than willing to work with our customers on that. And it's something I would recommend. If you don't do, you really need to be doing. You need to be understanding your costs and how everything affects you. So the other thing is, you know, we're looking at fall fertilizer right now, and there's a bunch of different products on the markets. You know, there's some research trials in Indiana at Purdue on sulfur in soybeans. We're trying to understand those. You know, it's still kind of, I have about 50-50 on do we need to put sulfur on beans and do we not. There's other stuff in corn. Some guys are going to put boron on this fall, or zinc. The thing you want to look at too is some of these fertilizers come with it all in one package, and we need to analyze how much we're actually paying for that. You know, are we getting a pound of zinc and we're paying a few $100s a ton for it, or are we getting it incorporated with our fertilizer and we're paying, you know, a couple $1,000s a ton for it? Convenience is one thing. The other thing is how available it is. It's going to be, you really need to kind of analyze a lot of that stuff and try to understand what you're spending and what you're doing. So, you know, the biggest thing we want to make sure is we're getting our bang for our buck on our P&K numbers this fall if we're putting fall fertilizer on. I've created a couple spreadsheets where we can do that kind of a breakdown. We'll use other fertilizers to figure out how much the N, P, and K is worth, and then we'll kind of gauge off of who's what and where everything's at, and try to understand our cost analysis per unit of fertilizer. And that's been working really well. That's another thing we can do for a lot of guys. So if you got any questions or concerns about fall fertilizer plans, soil sampling, I've got people probably trying to sample at different depths this year. We're really trying to overanalyze everything, and not even overanalyze, but maybe analyze a little bit more than we traditionally have done. So, and it's not a bad year to do that. You know, with the way costs and break-evens and everything are right now, it's probably a good thing to be doing that. So, if you got questions or any concerns, you want help on anything, that's kind of what we're here for. Give me a call, pop me a line on my email, even comment on our video on YouTube or wherever we post this on Facebook and Twitter. So we can answer a lot of those questions. Stay tuned for future updates. Start getting in the fields. I'll give you some on-field updates. We'll give you some cab updates. Just kind of seeing what we're doing out there. So stay tuned.